In 1994, in a quiet Detroit suburb, a 17-year-old boy built a functioning nuclear device in his mother's backyard shed. His experiments exposed 40,000 people to cancer-causing radiation and triggered a federal emergency. He collected radioactive material from smoke detectors, old clocks, and camping lanterns. So, how did a teenager obtain these dangerous materials? And why did it take so long for anyone to stop him? To understand how a teenager ends up with a radioactive shed, you have to go back to the beginning. David Hahn was born in 1976, just outside Detroit. His parents worked for General Motors, and they divorced when he was young. He spent most of his time at his dad's and stepmom's house. When he was 10, his step-grandfather gave him a gift. It was a book called The Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments. For most kids, that book leads to a baking soda volcano. For David, this book would change the trajectory of his entire life. He was instantly obsessed. He set up a laboratory in his bedroom. He bought real beakers, Bunsen burners, and test tubes. He lined his shelves with chemistry books and encyclopedias. By the time he was 14, when most kids are maybe messing around with model rockets, David Hahn had successfully fabricated nitroglycerin. His family saw the warning signs. There were small explosions, chemical spills that pockmarked the walls and stained the carpet. They didn't shut it down. They just made him move his lab to the basement. They were tired of him destroying his room. Banishing him to the basement was the opposite of punishment. Now he had more room and more privacy. His obsession only grew. He took after-school jobs just to buy more materials. He was a Boy Scout, and on one camping trip he showed up with a bright orange face. He said he was testing methods for artificial tanning. He was literally experimenting on himself. On that same trip, he and some other scouts blew a hole in their tent by igniting a stockpile of magnesium he'd brought to make fireworks. Then came the accident that should have ended it all. He was hammering a glass jar full of red phosphorus with a screwdriver. It exploded. Glass shards flew into his eyes and were embedded in his hands and arms. He wasn't wearing goggles. He had to have the glass surgically removed. Any reasonable person would have taken the chemistry set away. But they didn't. They just let him move his entire operation again. This time to his biological mother's potting shed in her backyard. His mom, Patty, and her boyfriend, Michael, knew he was out there for hours. They never really checked on him. They were just impressed by his work ethic. One day, Michael asked him what he was doing all the time. He said, "You know, someday, we're going to run out of oil." Around this time, David's dad thought his son needed more structure. He pushed him to become an Eagle Scout. To earn that rank, you need 21 merit badges. David chose his badges carefully. One of them was for atomic energy. He was the only scout in his troop's history to go for that badge. The badge requirements became his curriculum. To earn it, he had to research nuclear science, so he put together a pamphlet with help from utility companies, arguing that nuclear energy was good and vital. He had to understand reactor design, so he built a harmless model reactor out of a juice can, coat hangers, and rubber bands. He had to learn about radioactive isotopes, so he visited a hospital radiology unit. On May 10, 1991, a few months before his 15th birthday, David Hahn was awarded his Atomic Energy Merit Badge. The Merit Badge gave him something more than a patch. It gave him a roadmap. The research connected him with utility companies and nuclear professionals. The hospital visit showed him where radioactive materials were used and stored. The model reactor taught him basic principles of nuclear design. Most importantly, successfully earning the badge convinced him he understood the science. He wasn't just reading about nuclear reactors anymore. He believed he could build one. So he set a new goal, far more dangerous than any scouting requirement. He decided he would build a real, functioning breeder reactor. Not a model made of juice cans and coat hangers, but a device that could, in theory, create more nuclear fuel than it consumed. He was going to build it in his mom's shed. The question was, how? Now came the part that should have been impossible. So how does a teenager in suburban Michigan get the materials to build a nuclear reactor? He doesn't break into a lab. He doesn't have a secret benefactor. He just picks up the phone. David Hahn's method was simple, and it worked because nobody asked questions. He would call government agencies and private companies, pretending to be a high school physics teacher or a college professor. He used a deep voice and confident technical language. He called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He called the American Nuclear Society. He called the Edison Electric Institute. And when he did, people talked. They told him exactly how to get radioactive material and separate it from other stuff. A representative from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission basically gave him a step-by-step guide. David later said, "The NRC gave me all the information I needed. All I had to do was go out and get the materials." The law is designed so that no single person can legally obtain a large enough amount of this material to be dangerous. But the law wasn't built for someone like David Hahn, who was willing to call hundreds of companies and collect tiny amounts from thousands of common items. From his research and his phone calls, he built a shopping list. He needed americium-241, which is found in the ionization chambers of smoke detectors. He needed radium, which was used in the paint on old luminescent clock dials to make them glow in the dark. He needed thorium, which is found in the ash of camping lantern mantles. He started with the smoke detectors. He called a company, said he was a professor, and needed 100 detectors for a school project. They agreed. They shipped him 100 smoke detectors at a low price. They even told him exactly where in the device the radioactive americium was located. No one verified his identity. No one asked why a professor needed 100 smoke detectors. When the box arrived, David got to work. He extracted the tiny americium pellets from all 100 detectors. He welded them together and sealed them inside a lead block with a small hole drilled in it. He had built what's called a neutron gun, the crucial component needed to start a nuclear reaction. He moved on to the thorium. He bought thousands of old camping lantern mantles from army surplus stores. He burned them, collected the ash, and used a complex chemical process with lithium from batteries to purify the thorium. He got radium from old clock dials he bought at an antique store. He even managed to order uranium powder from a company in Czechoslovakia over the phone. He also got barium sulfate, a contrast agent used in X-rays, from the nurses at his local hospital's radiology ward. They just gave it to him when he asked. In the shed, he assembled his reactor core. He took the highly radioactive ball of americium and radium. He surrounded it with a blanket of tiny, foil-wrapped cubes. They were made from his purified thorium ash and uranium powder, stacked in an alternating pattern with carbon cubes. The whole precarious structure was held together with duct tape. He didn't have a concrete containment vessel. He didn't have remote handling equipment. He had a shed, some homemade tools, and a dangerous level of confidence. He now possessed a concentrated neutron source, a functional, though crude, nuclear device, and still, not a single adult had stepped in to stop him. But the real danger was just beginning. David's device wasn't a power plant. It couldn't light a light bulb. What he had built was a functional neutron source. It was emitting radiation, and it was doing it constantly. The radiation levels inside the shed began to climb. David monitored it with his Geiger counter. At first the readings were high in the shed. Then he could detect it from his backyard, then from his neighbor's yard. Soon, he was picking up radiation 5 houses down the street. This was the moment his curiosity crashed into reality. He had solved the puzzle of building the thing, but now he was faced with a new, terrifying puzzle: how to make it stop. He realized he might be poisoning his entire neighborhood. Even David Hahn, at 17, understood that this had gone too far. So he made a decision that would change everything. He decided to dismantle the experiment. He needed to get this concentrated radioactive material away from people, away from his mom's house. So, in the early hours of August 31st, 1994, he started loading the core, the thorium cubes, the lead blocks, and all the assorted radioactive junk into the trunk of his Pontiac. He had no idea that this moment, this single decision to move the reactor, would trigger a federal emergency. He was going to drive it somewhere, maybe bury it. He was loading it at 2:40 a.m. Neighbors saw him and thought he was stealing tires. They called the police. When the officers arrived, David was vague. He said he was just moving some things. They didn't buy it and went to search his car. That's when David gave them the warning. "Be careful," he said. "That's radioactive." The cops immediately backed away. They assumed the teenager had a homemade atomic bomb in his trunk. They called the bomb squad. The bomb squad arrived, and after some tense moments, they confirmed there was no bomb. But their radiation detectors went wild. They measured radiation levels nearly 1,000 times higher than normal background radiation. Finally, authorities were involved. But what happened next wasn't a swift, coordinated clean-up. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic failure, and while agencies argued over jurisdiction, the contamination spread. When questioned, David didn't immediately tell them about the shed, and nobody looked. For 2 months, the shed sat there, untouched. When the NRC finally sent someone to check the shed, they said it wasn't their problem. The shed wasn't an official government nuclear site, so it wasn't their job to clean it up. They just left. It wasn't until January of 1995, 5 full months after David's arrest, that the Environmental Protection Agency first showed up to inspect the property. But the actual cleanup didn't happen until June. What they found was horrifying. They wrote that the lab presented an imminent and substantial endangerment to public health or welfare or the environment. They said wind, rain, or a fire could spread the contamination. It was time to act. The EPA's cleanup finally happened in June of 1995. They declared the property a Superfund site. Men in full hazmat suits dismantled the shed, sealed every piece of it in steel drums, and shipped it to a special landfill in the Utah desert. It was buried there, alongside radioactive waste from government atomic bomb projects. The official assessment was staggering. The EPA concluded that David Hahn's experiments had exposed at least 40,000 people in the area to cancer-causing levels of radiation. For David, there were no criminal charges, but the shadow never left. The EPA wanted to give him a full medical exam to see what the radiation had done to his body. He refused. He was afraid of what they'd find. His life unraveled. His mother died by suicide in 1996. He drifted. He joined the Navy, then the Marines, but struggled with mental health. In 2007, he was arrested again. Police found him stealing smoke detectors. His mugshot showed a face covered in sores, which investigators suspected were from radiation exposure. He was sentenced to 90 days in jail. David Hahn died in September 2016. He was 39 years old. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental death from a combination of alcohol, fentanyl, and diphenhydramine. The radiation likely didn't kill him directly, but the trajectory of his life was forever bent by what happened in that shed. His death wasn't the real tragedy. The real tragedy was how easily it all could have been prevented. This story isn't really about a teenage genius, it's about every point where the system was supposed to catch him, and didn't. The parents who moved the lab instead of stopping it. The companies that shipped radioactive materials to a P.O. box, the government agencies that gave him the instructions, the bureaucrats who argued over jurisdiction while a neighborhood was being contaminated. David Hahn was the spark, but he was surrounded by kindling. David figured out how to build a nuclear reactor. But his real discovery was something scarier. Nobody was paying attention. Everyone just looked away. For more stories where brilliant ideas have devastating costs, subscribe.